I still remember the exact moment my father's words cut through me like a knife. I was 17, standing in our cramped kitchen in suburban Cleveland, Ohio, watching him beam with pride as he hung my brother Michael's latest achievement on the refrigerator. Another perfect report card, another scholarship offer, another reason for Dad to remind me how I'd never measure up. "Look at this, Nick," he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment whenever he looked at me. "Your brother's got 3 college scouts calling him this week. Full rides to Duke, Stanford, and Notre Dame." He turned to face me, his weathered hands still holding Michael's acceptance letter. "You know what your problem is? You'll never be like your brother. He's got discipline, focus, drive. You're always chasing these crazy dreams." The words hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. I stood there, my blonde hair falling into my eyes, trying to hold back tears that threatened to spill over. Michael wasn't even in the room. He was at football practice, probably breaking more records. But his presence filled every corner of our house like some kind of golden aura that I could never quite step into. Mom was at the kitchen table, quietly grading papers from her 3rd grade class. She looked up briefly, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of sympathy and helplessness. She never contradicted Dad, never stood up for me. It wasn't that she didn't love me. I knew she did. But in our house, Dad's word was law, and his law clearly stated that Michael was the success story while I was the cautionary tale. "I'm not trying to be like Michael," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm trying to be myself." Dad scoffed, that harsh laugh that had become the soundtrack to most of our conversations. "Yourself? And what exactly is that, Nick? A dreamer who thinks she can make money playing around on computers? Wake up, sweetheart. The real world doesn't work that way." I had been spending every free moment learning about digital marketing, web design, and social media management. While my classmates were at parties or watching TV, I was hunched over my ancient laptop, teaching myself skills that I somehow knew would matter someday. But to Dad, it was all just playing around. The kitchen felt smaller that day, the faded yellow walls closing in on me like a prison. Outside, the November wind was rattling the windows of our modest 2-story house, the same house where Michael's trophies lined the mantelpiece and his academic awards covered the walls. My few accomplishments: a small website I'd built for our neighbor's bakery, a social media campaign that had doubled attendance at a local charity event. These things didn't get framed or displayed. They were invisible, just like I felt most days. "You know what your brother did when he was your age?" Dad continued, completely oblivious to the fact that he was systematically destroying whatever confidence I had left. He was already being recruited by college coaches. He had a plan. He had goals. He knew exactly where he was going in life. I wanted to scream that I had goals too, that I stayed up until 2 in the morning every night working towards something that felt important to me. But I'd learned by then that trying to explain my dreams to Dad was like trying to describe color to someone who'd never seen anything but black and white. Michael walked through the front door at that moment, his 6'2" frame filling the doorway, his dark hair perfectly styled even after 2 hours of football practice. He had that easy confidence that came from being everyone's favorite, that natural charisma that made teachers smile and coaches take notice. He was everything I wasn't, or at least everything Dad thought I wasn't. "Hey, family," he said, his voice carrying that warm tone that made everyone feel good just being around him. He noticed the tension in the room immediately, his eyes moving from Dad's proud stance to my obvious distress. "What's going on?" "Just showing Nick here what real achievement looks like," Dad said, holding up the acceptance letter like it was a trophy. "Maybe it'll inspire her to stop wasting time on those computer games and focus on something real." Michael's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of discomfort crossing his features. For a moment, I thought he might say something, might defend me, or at least acknowledge that what I was doing wasn't just playing games. But the moment passed, and he just smiled that diplomatic smile he'd perfected over the years. "That's great about the scholarships," I said quietly, forcing myself to look at my brother. "You deserve it." And I meant it. Despite everything, despite the constant comparisons and the way his success seemed to highlight my every failure, I loved Michael. He was a good person, kind and generous in ways that had nothing to do with football or grades. It wasn't his fault that Dad had decided he was perfect, and I was a disappointment. "Thanks, Nick," he said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. "How's your website stuff going?" Before I could answer, Dad cut in. "Website stuff? See, that's the problem right there. Michael calls it a career. You call it stuff. That tells you everything you need to know about the difference between you two." That night, I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, Dad's words echoing in my head like a broken record. "You'll never be like your brother." Maybe he was right. Maybe I would never be like Michael. And maybe that was exactly the point. I pulled out my laptop and opened up the business plan I'd been working on for months. It was rough, full of holes and probably naive in a dozen different ways. But it was mine. It was a vision of something I could build, something that didn't require me to be anyone other than exactly who I was. As I typed into the early hours of the morning, I made myself a promise. Someday, I would prove that being different didn't mean being less. Someday, I would show Dad that there was more than one way to succeed, more than one way to make him proud. I had no idea that night that someday would come sooner than I thought, or that it would arrive in a way that would change everything about our family forever. 3 years had passed since that devastating conversation in our kitchen, and I was now 20 years old, living in a tiny studio apartment in downtown Austin, Texas. The move had been my declaration of independence, my way of saying that I refused to spend another day living in Michael's shadow or listening to Dad's constant reminders of my inadequacy. The apartment was barely 300 square feet, with a Murphy bed that doubled as my desk, and a kitchen that was essentially a hot plate and a mini fridge. But it was mine, paid for with the money I'd scraped together from freelance web design projects and social media management gigs. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of traffic on Congress Avenue and feel a surge of pride that I'd made it this far on my own. Austin had been the perfect choice for someone like me. The city was full of entrepreneurs, creatives, and people who understood that success didn't always come through traditional channels. I'd thrown myself into the startup scene, attending every networking event, workshop, and meetup I could find. While my peers back in Cleveland were finishing up college, I was getting a different kind of education, one that couldn't be taught in a classroom. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Your father wants to know if you're coming home for Thanksgiving. Michael will be there with his new girlfriend. She's pre-med at Duke." I stared at the message for a long moment, my finger hovering over the keyboard. Of course, Michael had a girlfriend who was pre-med at Duke. Of course, she would be another perfect addition to his perfect life story. I could already imagine Dad's reaction, more beaming pride, more pointed comments about how Michael was building something real while I was still playing around in Texas. "Can't make it," I typed back. "Too much work." It wasn't entirely a lie. I had been working 18-hour days for the past month, building what I hoped would be my breakthrough project. I'd identified a gap in the market for small businesses that needed professional digital marketing but couldn't afford the big agencies. My plan was to create a platform that would automate much of the process while still providing personalized service. It was ambitious, maybe even crazy, but it felt like the kind of crazy that could actually work. The real reason I wasn't going home, though, was that I couldn't bear another family gathering where I'd be the cautionary tale, the one who'd chosen the risky path while Michael continued to excel at everything he touched. According to Mom's updates, he was now captain of Duke's football team, maintaining a 3.8 GPA in pre-law, and dating someone who sounded like she'd stepped out of a college brochure. My laptop chimed with a notification from one of my clients, a small bakery in San Antonio that had hired me to revamp their online presence. In just 2 months, I'd increased their social media following by 400% and their online orders by 250%. The owner, Maria, had been so thrilled that she'd referred me to 3 other local businesses. It was exactly the kind of success story I'd dreamed of, but it felt hollow knowing that Dad would probably dismiss it as playing around on computers. I walked to the window of my apartment, looking out at the Austin skyline. The city was growing so fast that there seemed to be a new building going up every week. There was something energizing about being in a place where change was constant, where people were always building something new, always reaching for the next opportunity. My phone rang, and I was surprised to see Michael's name on the screen. We hadn't talked in months, our communication mostly limited to birthday texts and the occasional comment on social media posts. "Hey, stranger." His voice was warm, familiar in a way that immediately transported me back to our childhood. "How's life in the big city?" "It's good," I said, settling into my one chair, a secondhand desk chair I'd found at a garage sale. "Really good, actually. How's Duke treating you?" "Can't complain. Listen, I heard you're not coming home for Thanksgiving. Mom's pretty disappointed." I could hear the careful diplomacy in his voice, the way he'd learned to navigate family dynamics without taking sides. It was a skill I'd never mastered. "I'm just really busy right now," I said. "I'm working on something big and I can't afford to lose momentum." "What kind of something big?" For a moment, I considered giving him the same vague non-answer I'd been giving everyone, but something in his tone made me want to be honest, to share the excitement and terror that had been consuming me for months. "I'm building a platform for small businesses," I said, "a way to automate digital marketing while still keeping it personal. If it works, it could help thousands of businesses that can't afford traditional marketing agencies." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That sounds incredible, Nick. Really? How close are you to launching?" "Maybe 6 months. I'm bootstrapping everything, so progress is slow, but I think I'm onto something." "I believe you," he said, and there was something in his voice that made me think he actually meant it. I've always admired how you just went for it. Moving to Austin, starting your own thing, that takes guts. It was the first time in years that anyone in my family had said anything positive about my choices. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, surprised by how much his words meant to me. Thanks, I managed. That means a lot. Hey, Nick. His voice got quieter. I know Dad can be difficult, but you should know that what you're doing is impressive. Really impressive. After we hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time, watching the sunset over Austin. Michael's words had stirred something in me that I'd been trying to suppress for years. The desire to prove myself not just to Dad, but to my whole family. I wanted them to see that I'd been right all along, that the path I'd chosen was leading somewhere meaningful. I opened my laptop and pulled up my business plan. The numbers were daunting. I needed about $50,000 to properly launch the platform, money I didn't have and couldn't easily get. Traditional investors probably wouldn't take a 20-year-old college dropout seriously, and I'd already maxed out my credit cards keeping myself afloat. But looking at the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt that familiar surge of determination that had carried me this far. I'd figure it out somehow. I'd find a way to make this work, not just for the sake of my business, but for the sake of proving that Dad had been wrong about me. I had no idea that night that within 2 years, I'd be in a position to help my family in ways I never could have imagined. All I knew was that I was going to keep building, keep pushing, keep believing that someday all the late nights and sacrifices would pay off. The city lights were beginning to twinkle below me, and I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. 2 years later, I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Austin, my heart pounding as I watched the 3 investors across from me flip through my presentation. At 22, I'd finally done it. I'd built something that worked, something that mattered, something that was about to change my life forever. The platform I dreamed up in my tiny studio apartment had become MarketFlow, a comprehensive digital marketing solution that had already helped over 200 small businesses increase their revenue by an average of 180%. What had started as a scrappy one-woman operation had grown into a team of 12 talented people who believed in the vision as much as I did. "The numbers are impressive," said Jennifer Walsh, the lead investor from Beacon Capital. She was in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through any BS. "But what I'm most interested in is scalability. How do you plan to handle growth when you're dealing with such a personalized service model?" I'd been preparing for this question for months. "That's exactly what makes MarketFlow different," I said, leaning forward with the confidence I'd built through hundreds of client calls and late-night problem-solving sessions. "We've developed an AI-assisted system that learns from each client interaction, creating personalized campaigns that feel human but can scale infinitely. The technology handles the heavy lifting, but every business still gets strategies tailored to their specific needs and customer base." The second investor, Marcus Chen, nodded approvingly. "We've seen a 400% increase in client retention over the past year. That's not just impressive, it's almost unprecedented in this space." I smiled, thinking about Maria from the bakery in San Antonio, who was now running 3 locations and had become one of my biggest advocates. Or Dave from the auto repair shop in Dallas, who'd gone from struggling to pay rent to hiring 4 new mechanics. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were real people whose lives had been changed by something I'd built. "There's something else," I said, pulling up my final slide. "We're not just talking about current performance. I've been analyzing market trends, and I believe we're positioned to capture a significant share of the small business digital marketing sector. We're talking about a potential valuation of $50 to $75 million within 3 years." The room fell silent. Jennifer exchanged a look with her colleagues, and I could practically hear my own heartbeat echoing off the glass walls. "Nick," Jennifer said finally, "we'd like to make you an offer." What happened next felt like a dream. They offered me $12 million for a 30% stake in MarketFlow, a valuation that would make me worth over $25 million on paper, and give me liquid assets I'd never imagined having. I managed to keep my composure until I got back to my apartment, a much nicer one-bedroom place in East Austin that I'd moved into 6 months earlier. But the moment I closed the door behind me, I collapsed onto my couch and started crying. Not tears of sadness, but of pure, overwhelming relief and joy. I called Michael first. He was in his final year at Duke, about to graduate summa cum laude and head to law school at Harvard. But when I told him about the offer, he whooped so loudly that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Nick, this is incredible," he said. "I mean, I knew you were doing well, but this is amazing. I'm so proud of you." "Thanks," I said, still not quite believing it was real. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out it was all a dream. It's not a dream. You earned this. You built something incredible." He paused. You know you have to tell Mom and Dad, right? My stomach dropped. I'd been so focused on the business aspects that I hadn't really thought about how to share this news with my parents. Part of me was excited to prove Dad wrong, to show him that all those years of dismissing my computer games had been a massive mistake. But another part of me was terrified of his reaction. I know, I said. I don't know how to tell them. Just tell them the truth, Michael said. Tell them their daughter is about to be worth $25 million because she was brave enough to follow her dreams. That evening, I called home. Mom answered on the second ring, her voice immediately brightening when she heard it was me. Nick, what a wonderful surprise. How are you, sweetheart? I'm good, Mom. Really good. Is Dad around? I have some news to share. Of course. Let me get him. I heard her call out, Harold, Nick's on the phone with news. Dad's voice came through the phone with that familiar note of skepticism. What kind of news? I took a deep breath. I just received an offer to sell part of my company for $12 million. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could hear the TV in the background, some game show that Dad always watched after dinner. 12 million? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Dollars? Yes, a venture capital firm wants to invest in Market Flow. That's my company. They're valuing it at around $40 million total. I don't understand, Dad said, and for the first time in my life, I heard genuine confusion in his voice instead of dismissal. You're saying someone wants to pay you $12 million for your computer thing? My digital marketing platform, yes. It's helped over 200 small businesses increase their revenue significantly. The investors believe it could be worth much more in the future. There was another long pause. When Dad spoke again, his voice was completely different, smaller, almost uncertain. Nick, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Dad. I just wanted you to know. Sweetheart, Mom said, her voice thick with emotion. We're so proud of you. So incredibly proud. I heard Dad clear his throat. Nick, I owe you an apology. A big one. I was wrong about you, about what you were doing. I didn't understand, and I said things. I shouldn't have said. It was the first time in my life I'd ever heard my father admit he was wrong about anything. I felt tears rolling down my cheeks. Years of hurt and determination finally reaching this moment of vindication. It's okay, Dad, I said, and I meant it. I just needed you to see that there are different ways to succeed. I see that now, he said quietly. I see that you've done something extraordinary. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment looking out at the Austin skyline, the city lights twinkling like stars. I thought about that 17-year-old girl standing in the kitchen, being told she'd never amount to anything. She'd been so hurt, so determined to prove everyone wrong. Well, I'd proven them wrong. But somewhere along the way, I'd also proven something to myself. That success wasn't just about the money or the validation. It was about building something meaningful, something that helped people, something that made the world a little bit better. I had no idea that within 6 months I'd be faced with a choice that would test everything I'd learned about family, forgiveness, and what really matters in life. 6 months after the investment deal closed, I was living a life I'd never imagined possible. I'd moved into a beautiful downtown Austin condo with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lady Bird Lake, and Market Flow had grown to a team of 35 employees. The company was exceeding every projection, and I was being featured in business magazines as one of the 30 under 30 entrepreneurs to watch. But success, I was learning, came with its own set of challenges. The pressure was intense, the decisions more complex, and the weight of responsibility for my employees' livelihoods kept me awake at night. I was making more money than I'd ever dreamed of, but I was also working harder than ever before. It was a Tuesday evening in March when my phone rang with a call that would change everything. I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when I saw Michael's name on the screen. But when I answered, his voice sounded different, shaky, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. Nick, he said, I need to talk to you. It's about Mom and Dad. My heart immediately started racing. What's wrong? Are they okay? They're physically fine, but, Nick, they're in serious trouble. Financial trouble. Big trouble. I set down my pen and gave him my full attention. What kind of trouble? Dad's been hiding it from everyone, but the business is failing. Has been for over a year. You know how he always talked about expanding the hardware store, maybe opening a second location? I remembered. Dad had owned Murphy's Hardware in downtown Cleveland for 15 years. It had been his pride and joy, the thing that defined him as a provider and businessman. He took out massive loans to expand. Michael continued. He opened 3 new locations in the past 2 years, but they're not profitable. Online retailers are killing small hardware stores, and Dad, he didn't adapt. He didn't want to believe that things were changing. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who dismissed my digital business as playing around had failed to recognize how digital commerce was destroying his own industry. How bad is it? I asked. though I was already dreading the answer. $500,000, Nick. That's what they owe between the business loans, the mortgage they took out against the house, and the credit cards they've maxed out trying to keep the stores afloat. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. $500,000. It was a number that would have seemed impossible just a year ago, but now it was something I could actually handle. Mom doesn't know how bad it is, Michael said. Dad's been hiding the worst of it from her. But I saw the papers when I was home last weekend. Nick, they're going to lose everything. The stores, the house, their retirement savings, everything. I walked to my window, looking out at the Austin skyline. The city looked so bright and full of possibilities, but all I could think about was my parents' house in Cleveland, the house where I'd grown up, where Mom had graded papers at the kitchen table and Dad had hung Michael's achievements on the refrigerator. What about bankruptcy? I asked. Dad won't consider it. He says it would ruin his reputation, that he'd rather lose everything than admit failure publicly. You know how he is about pride. I did know. Dad's pride had been both his driving force and his weakness for as long as I could remember. It was the same pride that had made him dismiss my dreams, and now it was preventing him from making the practical choices that could save his family. Michael, I said slowly, I could help them. What do you mean? I could pay off their debts. All of them. Tonight, if I wanted to. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Nick, Michael finally said, that's incredible. But would you? I mean, after everything Dad said to you, after the way he treated your dreams? It was a fair question. For years, I'd fantasized about a moment like this, a moment where I could prove to Dad that he'd been wrong about me, where I could show him exactly what his computer games had accomplished. But now that the moment was here, I felt something I hadn't expected. Heartbreak. Not heartbreak for myself, but for him. I thought about Dad in his hardware store, probably working late into the night, trying to figure out how to save something that couldn't be saved. I thought about Mom, who dedicated her life to teaching children and supporting her family, facing the possibility of losing her home. I need to think about this, I said. Can you give me a day or two? Of course. But Nick, they don't have very long. The banks are starting to make moves. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the things Dad had said to me over the years, all the ways he'd made me feel small and inadequate. Part of me wanted to let him face the consequences of his own decisions. He'd been so certain that his way was the right way, so dismissive of anything that didn't fit his narrow definition of success. But I also kept thinking about the conversation we'd had when I told him about the investment offer, the way his voice had changed when he realized he'd been wrong, the apology he'd offered, probably the first real apology he'd ever given me. I got up and made myself a cup of tea, then sat on my balcony overlooking the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the city lights like scattered diamonds. I thought about what success really meant, about what kind of person I wanted to be now that I had the power to change lives. The next morning, I called my financial advisor. I need to liquidate some assets, I said. About $600,000 worth. That's quite a bit of liquidity, she said. May I ask what it's for? I'm helping my family, I said, and I think it might be the most important business decision I've ever made. As I hung up the phone, I realized that I'd already made my choice, not because I'd forgiven Dad completely, and not because I thought he deserved my help. I was doing it because forgiveness wasn't about what people deserved. It was about what I could live with. I could live with helping my family, even if they'd never helped me. I could live with being the bigger person, even if it meant swallowing my pride. What I couldn't live with was watching my parents lose everything when I had the power to stop it. The money would be transferred by the end of the week. Now I just had to figure out how to tell them. I drove from Austin to Cleveland in my new Tesla Model S, the same car I'd dreamed about owning when I was surviving on ramen noodles in my studio apartment. The 12-hour drive gave me plenty of time to think about what I was going to say, how I was going to handle what would probably be the most important conversation of my life. I hadn't told my parents I was coming. I'd simply called Mom and said I'd be in town for a few days on business. Michael knew what I was planning, and he'd agreed to meet me at the house to provide moral support. As I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite untangle. The house looked smaller than I remembered, and older. The paint was peeling on the front porch, and the lawn needed attention. These were the kinds of details that told the story of a family under financial stress, trying to maintain appearances while everything crumbled underneath. Mom opened the door before I could knock, her face lighting up with the genuine joy I'd always associated with her. "Nick! Oh, sweetheart, you look wonderful!" She hugged me tightly, and I breathed in the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with the smell of whatever she'd been cooking. "Hi, Mom," I said, hugging her back. "You look great, too." Dad appeared in the doorway behind her, and I was shocked by how much older he looked. His hair had gone completely gray, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. But when he saw me, his face broke into a smile. A real smile, not the polite one he used to wear around me. "Nick," he said, stepping forward to embrace me. "It's so good to see you." The hug was different from the awkward, obligatory ones of my childhood. This felt genuine, like he was actually happy I was there. Michael arrived 20 minutes later, and we all sat in the living room where I'd spent so many evenings listening to Dad praise my brother's achievements while dismissing my own dreams. The walls still displayed Michael's trophies and awards, but now they felt like artifacts from a different era. "So," Mom said, settling into her favorite chair, "tell us about this business trip. Are you expanding to Cleveland?" I looked at Michael, who gave me an encouraging nod. "Actually, I'm not here on business. I'm here because I know about the financial situation." The change in the room was immediate. Dad's face went pale, and Mom looked confused, glancing between her husband and her children. "What financial situation?" she asked. Dad closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "They know about the stores, Helen, about the loans." For the next half hour, I watched my parents have the conversation they should have had months ago. Dad explained the expansion, the failed projections, the mounting debt. Mom's face went through a series of emotions: shock, anger, fear, and finally, a kind of resigned sadness. $500,000, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Harold, how did you let it get this bad?" "I thought I could fix it," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought if I just worked harder, if I just found the right strategy. I didn't want to worry you." I didn't want to admit that I'd failed. It was the first time I'd ever seen my father vulnerable, and it broke my heart in ways I hadn't expected. "Dad," I said gently, "you didn't fail. You took a risk. Sometimes risks don't pay off." He looked at me with eyes that held decades of regret. "I should have listened to you, Nick, all those years ago when you were trying to tell me about digital marketing, about how business was changing. I was so stubborn, so sure I knew better." "That's in the past," I said. "What matters now is moving forward." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder of documents. "I've had my financial team prepare some paperwork. I want to pay off all your debts." The silence in the room was deafening. Mom's hand went to her mouth, and Dad just stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "All of them," I continued. "The business loans, the mortgage, the credit cards, everything. I want to give you a clean slate." "Nick," Dad said, his voice cracking, that's over $500,000. You can't possibly—" "I can," I said simply. "Market flow is worth over $70 million now. I can afford to help my family." Tears were streaming down Mom's face. "Sweetheart, that's too much. We can't accept that much money from you." "You're not accepting it," I said. "I'm giving it. There's a difference." Dad was shaking his head. "After everything I said to you, after the way I treated your dreams, Nick, you don't owe us anything. If anything, I owe you an apology that's about 20 years overdue." "You already apologized," I said. "And you know what? I spent years being angry about those things you said. But I realized something recently. Your doubts, your criticism, your lack of faith in me, they made me stronger. They made me more determined. They made me prove to myself that I could succeed on my own terms." I leaned forward, looking directly at my father. "You said I'd never be like Michael. You were right. I'm not like Michael. I'm like me. And being like me turned out to be pretty good." Dad broke down then, really broke down. This man who'd seemed so strong and sure of himself throughout my childhood was crying like a child, his shoulders shaking with the weight of years of pride and regret. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't believe in you. I'm so sorry I made you feel like you weren't enough." I got up and went to him, kneeling beside his chair like I used to do when I was little and wanted his attention. "Dad, you did believe in me. You just didn't know it. Every time you pushed me to be better, every time you challenged me to prove myself, you were believing in me. You were believing that I was strong enough to handle the pressure." We spent the next hour going through the paperwork, setting up the payments, and talking about the future. I insisted that Dad keep one of the stores, the original one that had been profitable, and transition it to include online sales and digital marketing. I offered to have my team help him set up the e-commerce platform. "Think of it as a partnership," I said. "You know hardware, I know digital. Together we can make something that works." As the sun began to set, painting the living room in warm golden light, I looked around at my family. Mom was holding Dad's hand, both of them looking lighter than they had in months. Michael was grinning at me with pride and admiration, and for the first time in my life I felt like I truly belonged in this room. "You know," Dad said, his voice stronger now, "I used to worry that you'd never amount to anything. Now I realize I should have been worried that you'd amount to more than I ever imagined." "We all amount to something, Dad," I said. We just amount to different things. That night, I slept in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by memories of the girl who'd been told she'd never be like her brother. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about how right Dad had been. I'd never be like Michael. I'd never be the golden child, the perfect student, the one who followed the expected path. But I was something else entirely. I was the one who'd taken the road less traveled and found success on my own terms. I was the one who'd turned doubt into determination, criticism into strength, and dismissal into drive. Most importantly, I was the one who'd learned that true success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. And in the end, that had made all the difference. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of Mom's pancakes and the sound of Dad on the phone, already making plans for the digital transformation of his business. Michael was at the kitchen table, typing on his laptop, probably working on law school applications. "Morning, family," I said, borrowing Michael's old greeting. "Morning, Nick," they all said in unison, and for the first time in my life, I heard my own name spoken with the same warmth and pride that had always been reserved for my brother. I had finally come home.